is, so it's working as intent detection.
Upload slides. No, I don't want to upload slides. I actually want to do it the opposite direction. Download slides.
Okay.
Very good.
10 a.m. Good morning. Buenos dias. Bonjour. Guten Morgen. Okay, I'm Warren. This is Chris Morrow. Oh no, wait. Anyway, Warren and Chris couldn't be here today, so we'll run the session. But all complaints about slides are going to Warren. And if you are afraid you are still in Dublin, you are not. It is IETF 123, not 211. But I'm glad to see how many people are paying attention to slides from the very beginning. Okay, where is my... So, I see many familiar faces, but in case you don't know what IEPG is, it stands for Internet Engineering and Planning Group. I don't know about planning, to be honest, but we definitely can talk about engineering today. So, we have 4 presentations today. And any last minute agenda bashing? Anyone just came up with exciting idea or reports about how to operate the internet? No. Okay. Oh, wait, I have. Okay. And the first presentation is Alex about going to tell us about detecting external disruption in ISP networks. Okay, let me share slides. Hi, you're just gonna tell me next slide and I'll move to the next slide, okay?
So hello everyone, I am Alex and I am presenting today how can we detect external disruptions from a service provider's perspective. So next slide, please. To provide you a bit of context, service providers offer multiple IP-based connectivity services such as BGP, MPLS, VPNs, or internet connectivity. We all know that network disruptions happen in the network, but what it matters to service providers is how they manage these disruptions. They both affect the reputation and the business of the service provider, and therefore operators, they need, or at least they desire a solution to first detect these disruptions very fastly so they can provide a solution as soon as possible, but a system that provides alerts that are comprehensible to the network engineers receiving these alerts. Otherwise, they don't understand what is happening on the network. And so in this project, we wanted to investigate how can we detect these service anomalies in real world service providers, which data can we use that aligns with daily processes, can we base a solution only on standards, and whether a knowledge-based approach is also effective in detecting these anomalies. Next slide, please. What can we find in the state of the art? The common approach to anomaly detection is a data-centric approach. We let a machine learning model define a baseline based on the input data, and based on the detected outliers, we trigger alerts. Normally, the output of these data-centric systems, they are not entirely interpretable. They only tell you what data is wrong, and in the state of, and additionally, on the state of the art, usually anomaly detection is focused on detecting anomalies on the internet topology, as there are a lot of data sets that are public. And this usually results in 2 points. First, loss of trust by network engineers when you implement such a system, and it lacks defined starting point for troubleshooting. And so what we told ourselves is that we need a network-centric solution. And so we use standards when it's possible to avoid reinventing the wheel. For example, when a service provider changes for a new vendor, we use open source solution to yet again avoid locking into specific products from vendors, and of course scalable network telemetry protocols, as these systems need to be deployed at scale. Next, please. A high-level architecture of what we are doing, we are collecting information from the three network planes, forwarding plane using IPFix to monitor customer flows or drop packets. To monitor the control plane, we are using VMP to get the topology information, and a management plane or any device-related information using YAML. This data is collected by our open source collector, PMSCCT, which correlates the data before pushing it to Kafka. At the end of Kafka, we have an ingester who basically ingest the data to our time series database, who is itself used by network engineers to troubleshoot the network and our system to trigger alerts. Next. Our approach to really align what network engineers are doing on our system is rather simple. What we want is to mimic what network engineers are doing on their daily basis. So for example, if a network engineer notices that there are some traffic flows that are being dropped, he scratches his head. He's not very concerned as there are not any other event related to these drop packets. However, if he notices that also there are some BGP events that telling him that there are some prefixes removed from the network related to this same customer, he starts to get a bit more concerned. And is lastly, for example, he also gets a notification about an interface going down that it's on the path of this customer. He's almost sure that there is an anomaly. So our approach is really automating these relatively small checks that network engineers at the end they understand, and to generate what we call concern scores. These concern scores represent how concerning a network engineer would be by looking at the given data. And at the end, once all the consent scores are generated, we are aggregating these consent scores to generate an alert based on a threshold that we have to find. Next. So this framework and approach has already fully deployed at Swisscom, which we are currently monitoring 13,000 VPN customers. But today focus is on internet connectivity services, where we have two big groups of anomalies. First, we want to detect disruptions. These are events that break the connectivity service from our customers. For example, losing a top talker, a top receiver. These are AESs from the internet that generate most of the traffic, and therefore losing one of these can affect hugely to our customers. A neighbor autonomous system that has been disconnected from the internet. Therefore, we want to be alerted, or performing trending analysis on a link to know whether we are saturating, for example. We have a second group, which are anomalies. And these are events that, although they don't break the connectivity services, they are important to service providers as they can affect the business of the service provider. For example, traffic that was initially forwarded through a settlement fee peer that now somehow has moved to a transit provider, and therefore we are paying for this traffic. Monitoring traffic ratios on settlement fee peers. We may want to track whether this peer is aligned with the agreement we had. And then lastly, we also have security-related anomalies, but as of now, they are further works. Next, please. Our approach is really studying production data, and we are collaborating with Swisscom to how they are collecting this data, but also how they are monitoring these use cases. And in 2025, we have had three big disruptions. The first is the Chile power blackout. We left the country without electricity and obviously impacted the network infrastructure. We have had a nationwide disruption from Bouygues Telecom, a French internet service provider, that left all the customers from France in Bouygues Telecom without internet for a few hours. And in the following slide, I wanted to showcase a bit the metrics from this last disruption, which is the Iberian Peninsula power blackout. Next, please. For the ones that are unfamiliar with this outage, on April 28th, there was a big outage in Spain that left the country, well, Spain and Portugal without electricity. This disruption lasted for a day almost, and by 8:30 p.m., only 35% of the energy demand was met, and full restoration was about 11 o'clock on the next day. Obviously, this had huge impacts on the internet traffic coming and going out from Spain and Portugal. Some reports say that, yeah, Spain traffic dropped to 20% of typical levels, while Portugal traffic dropped to 10% of typical levels. These the four figures we have here are the metrics retrieved from Swisscom, from the point of view of Swisscom. So we have on the top two, they are traffic from Spain, uh, um, ingress traffic, so traffic going from Spain to Swisscom, and egress traffic, so Swisscom to Spain. And the bottom two are the same, but from Portugal. And that's something that usually network engineers, they do. So they just compare what happened on traffic and compare to 1 week before, as they consider that the normal baseline, right? And what we observe here is that in most of these figures, we see a drop about 50% of its traffic. Next. Uh, Obviously, we also have some BGP activity, and what we notice is that since the disruption started, uh, BGP became a lot more spikier, and there were an increase in both BGP updates and withdrawals. Next. And however, while this is interesting from a service provider perspective, they don't usually monitor an entire country, right? So they define different autonomous systems that they consider important for them for whatever reasons, and they monitor each AS as on a per AS basis. And this is what we did on this use case. We have retrieved the same metrics from two ASs. This is the first one from Orange, Spain. What we see, we have pretty similar traffic patterns, a sharp decrease on both inbound and outbound traffic once the tower outage started, and obviously an increase in BGP events in both updates and withdrawals. And so for this use case, we define an anomaly detection strategy, which really aligns what they are doing. So first, comparing inbound and outbound traffic to 1 week before, as we consider that normally 1 week before they are the nominal data, and obviously detecting spikes on BGP. We are, for the aggregation at the end of this consensus course, we are also putting different weights, as a network engineer would be less concerned for a BGP update than a BGP withdrawal, as withdrawing a prefix means that we have lost the reachability of a prefix. And so similarly, we are putting a less weight on a BGP update in this case. So next. And so these are the results of applying this strategy to this AS. What we observe is that since the disruption started, all the BGP events became spiky, and our concern scores that were checking on the BGP updates and BGP withdrawal triggered a lot of concern scores. These concern scores are from 0 to 1, 1 representing the maximum value, and therefore the network engineer would be very concerned. And the alert level is the aggregation of these concern scores, and we observe that based on a let's say threshold, we can trigger an alert. Next. And this is the second case on the NOS Portugal. And while in the NOS Portugal, let's say, was less affected on the received ingress traffic, it was not as sharp as Orange Spain, and there had less BGP events. We still see that the strategy can still detect, based on our different checks, that we can detect still the anomaly. Next. So just to conclude, service anomaly detection to be used and understood by service providers, they need to be tailored to their daily processes. Otherwise, they don't understand it and it is just not adopted. And our approach is really mimicking data inspections that they really do on their daily basis. And we have proved that on the VPN network, this approach works. And we are currently studying on the internet whether this also can be used. And as these strategies are really algorithms that we are implementing ourselves, they can be tailored to not only disruptions, but also targeted anomalies that may have an impact on the business of the service provider. As future works, we plan to integrate YAML push data. This has been proven very effective in detecting anomalies on layer 3 VPN networks. For some use case, we also plan to study whether external views. So right now we are collecting all the information from a service provider's perspective, but for some use case, we may want to get a view from the outside. And at the end, maybe in the future, root cause analysis to provide more hints about what could be the root case for the service provider. Next. So what's next? If you continue to be interested in most incident postmortems, there is Nmap session. It's not in Wednesday, I think it's in Monday, where there are two service providers who will present production postmortem presentations. If otherwise you are interested in contributing to requirements or anomaly detection, currently we have 4 drafts that are discussed on Nmap. So we are welcoming you to the Nmap session. So next, these are for reference the related papers and international draft that we are working on, and that's it. Next slide. So
Hi, Dan from Cisco. Thanks, Alex, for the presentation. In slide 6 at the beginning, you don't need to go back. You mentioned future work, BGPI tracking, which is very interesting. So can you give us a sneak peek of what you have in mind? Is it just to detect BGPI prefix, BGPI tracking, or is to prevent?
So on anomaly detection, we are really into the detection of these use cases. So it's mostly on detecting the prefix hijack rather than preventing it.
Jeff Houston, I have a question about anomaly detection and BGP. I'm a network. I see a change in my incoming traffic. How can BGP tell me what's happening over there that has caused the anomaly in my incoming traffic?
So you receive the BGP events from the exterior, and we are collecting that.
Well, I've received them from my neighbor, who's received them from their neighbor, who's received it, etc., etc.
Oh, yes.
Right? So there is a change in what's happening on my local interface. I know that.
Yes.
But how do I diagnose a problem out there with BGP?
Jeff, can you get microphone slightly up? It's hard for people remotely to hear you.
Let me swallow this thing. Ugh, actually, I don't think I will swallow it. My question is, BGP doesn't necessarily tell you where the traffic comes from and why.
Yeah.
It's a predictive algorithm about forwarding the traffic, but once it's forwarded, there's no history. So how do you do anomaly detection when I'm trying to do something outside my network?
Yeah, exactly. But so here we are inferring the anomaly. We are not detecting. So we are not defining the root cause. So we are detecting that there is an issue on the network, but we still don't know. We are providing hints to the network engineers so that they can troubleshoot further. But we still don't know, and I agree with you.
It strikes me, you know, detecting things are going wrong from normality in my network is really easy. It's not hard in the slightest. Trying to do remote detection of other people's networks is actually something that BGP doesn't help you with. And you're kind of going, is this the right way to attack that problem?
I don't know.
Okay,
That's a good question. Yeah,
Thanks.
I don't know.
Uh, just as an exercise for the IETF weeks, there is a remote client which you can use to join the queue, which make chair's life much, much easier.
Rüdiger Volk. Less of a question, but rather a response to Geoff. Uh, actually, having a little bit of information about what happened on the Iberian Peninsula those days, I learned that to a large extent, the actual networks and the presence of ASs continued, and just the residential customers had the blackout. Of course, you can't detect that in BGP. And there is, of course, the directionality, but kind of for providing information and hints to the operators, collecting BGP events, and kind of putting the same stuff into the machine learning with the traffic allows you to potentially get a hint. There is no security in getting the information. But well, during my lifetime, I was really happy when I got hints about that something was happening and were.
Thomas from Swisscom. So just to get back on Jeff, so let's say this is the monitor domain, right? And let's say over there is another operator, right? And you were mentioning how is BGP helping us to understand whenever there is a problem, there is an anomaly. Well, actually BGP does, because if the operator has a problem over there, that problem will be propagated to here. So if the network is going down, I'm receiving the withdrawals and I have the traffic, which is no longer forwarded to that path, and it's being dropped in here. So I think a network operator finds it valuable to understand that the reason why the traffic is being dropped is because that path has been withdrawn from his neighbor, from his other operator. So that's why correlating the two, the forwarding or the missing traffic, and basically the BGP topology changes is valuable, and showing that to an operator and showing the relationship, that's, I think, what Alex is trying to describe here. Does that make sense?
If you're lucky enough, and I'll jump in, there's no one else in the queue. If you're lucky enough to see the anomaly expressed in route withdrawals,
yeah,
you're in a good place.
Exactly.
But typically what you see in this heavily meshed network that we operate is that it's subtle path changes, not withdrawals. And understanding from the constant background chatter of path and path attribute changes, what's significant and what isn't, is, I think, for us as a community of routing folk, an incredibly difficult problem. And I haven't seen cut-through solutions yet, because there's an awful lot of updates,
right,
and trying to figure out which ones are important and which ones are just, oh God, is that the time? Let me do an update, you know.
Absolutely.
That's a challenge.
I think one of the reasons why in the past this was a problem is because of the monitoring protocols we are doing. So if you go in the public internet and go to route views as an example, most of the time the data collection on BGP is by doing BGP peerings. So you're only getting the best passes. However, if you're using BMP and you have visibility into the local IP, these subtle changes you're saying, basically you're seeing. And if you can correlate that with the amount of flows is happening, so you see that traffic is actually redirected to a different path, and then your amount of flows is decreasing.
No more questions? Okay, thank you, Alex. So, Jeff, you're next, I think.
You've got the slides, right?
Yes, I got the slides. Just give me a second. Yes, quick Safari.
Hi, Jeff Houston. Now, am I close enough to the microphone?
It's
Someone will complain,
yeah,
right?
people on remote.
If you can't hear me, tough. Maybe you should feel relieved. This is a completely different area of looking at the network, and I've now elevated you right up into the application layer. For those of you who've been asleep for the last, geez, isn't it a decade now? It's been a long time and haven't realized there is a new transport protocol out there, Quick, which was kind of an evolution of work that I first saw reported with Google. I think they called it Speedy, and they were trying to shave literally milliseconds or less out of the time from I want to connect to first packet. Next slide. So Quick is a rethinking of TCP. But the problem is that when the spec of the layered protocol model came out, the idea was that network elements weren't meant to look at transport. No, no, no. No one was watching, no one was listening. The network is incredibly aware of transport. And these days, with things like NATs in particular, you have no hope in hell of trying to introduce a new transport protocol. Even the folk that were trying to do generic encapsulation, GRE, in the early days of the V6 transition, it failed because basically no one liked the new protocol number. So your choices when you want to do a new protocol is that you've got to use either proto, is it 6 or 17? I forget. It's either UDP or TCP or nothing. You can't do anything else. So if you say, I want to do a new transport, you've got to fake it. And the way that they faked it was they just put it on UDP. UDP is a decent emulation of IP, and it happens to get through most stuff. The only difference is NATs have no fixed binding. So you've got to do a little bit of address agility, but as long as you've done that, the rest is easy. So Quick is a reimagining of TCP for basically the 2020s. It has not only full-blown encryption all the way up, which says to anything in the network, if you want to see what I'm doing, get stuffed. It's not visible to you, and you can't manipulate those control bits. They're just not there. But as well as that, it has changed sequencing, framing numbers. It has actually introduced a reasonable way of doing remote procedure call, reliable datagrams, a whole bunch of things that would have been cool to have are actually sitting inside Quick because there are genuine uses for it. So Quick is kind of a 21st century transport protocol, and it's not a bad protocol. Next slide. The trick is, how do you actually make it work? Now, the old school was you probe. You send a packet and you wait for an answer. Now, don't forget, this came out of the work on Speedy. And sending a probing packet is fine. How long do you wait for? 2 milliseconds? 500 seconds? How long does a Linux stack hang around to try and initiate a TCP session to an unresponsive remote client? That's a question. Any guesses? It's not a geological era, but it feels like it because it's 108 seconds. That's not a speedy protocol. That's crap. So you can't probe and wait if you're trying to be fast. That's just not an option. So the first way of doing this comes from RFC, Christ, I'm going to say 7458, and I've probably got it wrong. It is in a standard somewhere. And what it says is, on the first visit, which is going to happen on TLS over TCP or whatever, tie it to the content, and in the HTTP stream, say, the next time you come to me, I'm cool, I can do Quick. That H3 directive says, come to me on port 443 on UDP, and I'll be waiting for you. The beauty of that is no probing delay, nothing. You don't, will you? I've told you I can. Send me a packet and I'll give you an answer. So that's the first one that's used. Next slide. Chrome set that up in 2020 in public release. So they're running it internally inside Google's network for some years before that. And because Chrome has a pretty dominant share of the market out there, and no matter how you look, you'll come up with an answer that around about 2/3 of humanoids out there typically use Chrome as their way of navigating around the internet, if that's still what kiddies do, sort of the pre-AI number. God knows what happens in an AI world. It's all meant to get fed into my neurons or something. So anyway, in the old style web world, around about 2/3 of the browsers used the Chrome stack, and Chrome has been supporting this since 2020. Next slide. So 65% of the market does this. So if I set up a web page with that directive in it, then I should see a huge amount of quick, right? Because everyone supports it, because Chrome, because if you're running a 5-year-old version of Chrome, you have so many problems with malware security, blah, 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 you're probably not seeing anything at all. So that's what I should see. Next slide. But the problem is that lots of other people were solving similar problems differently. When you do TLS and TCP, how many round trips? 3 to set up the TLS session? The last thing you want to do is tear it down willy-nilly. So if I want to send you 3 objects, it's kind of, hang on, let's not close this session. Let's just say I've delivered you 1 object and I'll hang around for a little while. In case you want another, the session's up and ready, we can just resume and keep on going. Session persistence was a feature of both HTTP 1.1, someone can correct me if they remember the right number, and it's certainly in HTTP 2.0. So when do you trigger this second session? How often does this second session happen? Now, I only cache it for 24 hours, so new day, start from afresh. But what about, session persistence? How much does that alter the number? Next slide. I just said that. Next slide. Well, we'd try and measure that. So we need to actually figure out how to make that second fetch happen, and almost despite what we think about keep alives, also keep track of what the client thinks about keep alives. So the way we do this in the way we measure using ads is that this time there's a magic thing inside the ad stream that says, don't get it once, get the same 1-by-1 block 8 times with a gap of precisely 2 seconds of each iteration. Eventually, you're going to time out, restart the session, and we're going to tickle the fact that you can do quick. So this is kind of a trace coming in the browser that we paste those fetches and repeats to finally sort of figure out, can you really, really, really do quick if we push you hard enough? Next. So that's the first method. But then during that interim, and the dates kind of get me, but along came this idea that despite the fact that the DNS hated to do multiple pieces of information in one transaction, remember those fights about putting A and quad A into the one transaction? Oh no, you can't cross the beams, and we all get very confused. Along came the SVCB record that said, I don't care what you asked for. Here's everything I know about how to initiate a connection to this named service. All of it, one transaction. Here's the upper level protocol. Here's some hints about addresses. If you want to do encrypted client hello, here's some stuff about encryption. Everything you wanted to know to get the connection, including the application level protocol. And so inside the HTTPS variant of SVCB, RFC, oh my God. I'm going to punt and say 9460. Could be wrong, don't take my word for it. ALPN equals H3 says, if you ask the DNS will tell you before you even send the first packet, then I'm cool, I can do quick, just send me these packets over 443 and we're cool. Safari went there. Next. So Apple Safari, when it was introduced, I'm going to guess 2.5 years ago, basically works off the ALPN directive in the HTTPS DNS query. So it's triggered immediately. The first connection is quick. not the second, not the third, the first. So as long as you ask for HTTPS, you can use quick immediately. Next. So how much quick could we see, should we see? Chrome, 65% of the user market. Safari, opinions vary, but if you said 20%, you're not far wrong. It's sort of around there. Different triggers though. Chrome is doing it on the second fetch. Safari is doing it on, I'm asking for HTTPS, I can do this right away. You put the two together, and because Safari should be able to do it for all Safari, maybe it's sort of 65 plus 85. It should be a lot of quick out there. Next slide. What do we actually see? This is Cloudflare's number on Cloudflare radar. It's not 85%, it's not 65%. What they see, and is seen there, that's over a 1 month period, 12-month period, is about 31%. So whatever else is going on out there in Cloudflare land, the second visit incident is quite low, and the number of folk who are doing this service directive must be quite low as well. It's not exactly impressive. So, you know, casually in the CDN world, around 1/3 of stuff is on quick. Next slide. So less than half of the maximum, and it just seems to be something related to the alt service directive and the number of people actually using it in their content. Next. Our numbers, we push. So we have control of the content, and so when we say to a user, here's an ad, it wants you to use quick, it has both an HTTPS directive and it has alt service. And we make a difference between the first time you hit it, because you come back 8 times, and the second through 8th. And what we're actually finding is these days, around about 18% of users across the entire world, and we're doing around 35 million ads a day, around 18% do quick straight away. But if we push it on the repeats, that number goes as high as 70%. So there's an awful lot of capability out there and very little blocking. Next. In Safari, almost every browser that has a browser string that says it's Safari, and some lie, but almost everyone actually do an HTTPS query. Chrome, that's weird. Not no one, 3%. That's an odd number. Either the master people at Google have said, you're the lucky 3%, you can do an HTTPS query, the rest of you, no such luck. Or it's happening external to Chrome in the infrastructure around where the browser sits. The blue number is the total. It's low because Chrome is dominant, Safari is not. And the other sort of 20% of folk who do other browsers, Edge, Samsung, blah, 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 around about 60, 40, 60% or so, but it's a small share. Next. Chrome fascinates me. It's just such a really weird number. It's not 0 and it's not a lot. And I look hard and it's weekdays, not weekends. It's some kind of environment in some kind of working environment world. There must be people in the office still somewhere on the planet who use Chrome with this HTTPS query trigger, but not so much on weekends. And the number has been steadily over the last 6 months dropping, not rising. I have no idea. Next. So why? Don't know. Is this Chrome? I don't think so. Unless someone in Google is even smarter than anyone's given credit for, and they're pretty clever people. I think it's the environment, not the browser. Next. So I should see a high level of quick because both Safari and Chrome are now supporting it one way or another. Next. Globally, what do we see? Well, very few networks filter UDP port 443 systematically. The ones that are in red are China and Iran. Morocco has a bit of a problem. There are other countries like Germany that have some slight problems, but on the whole, those two countries, Iran and China. Next. Oh, and the Falkland Islands. Who cares? You've seen that slide. It was there for a reason. I've forgotten what the reason was. Next. That's right. This is where I wanted to go. What's going on in those two countries? Next. Iran. I reckon all the traffic in and out of the country goes through one room. And that room is stuffed full of equipment and people looking at it. And the equipment has control over ports and sessions. And at some point, they turned on quick. At some subsequent point, they turned it off. At some point, they sort of turned it on. And then in the last 2 months, there was the big blackout. Everything got turned off. Ads didn't work. The data got all noisy. And right now, in the last few weeks, there's nothing sensible seen from Iran because there's just not enough visibility into the country. There's probably a network block, but it's hard to tell. Next. China. How do you explain 20 to 30% can do it and the other 70% can't? It's not at the browser, it's not at the user level. It's kind of, I don't know, are you on the blacklist or the whitelist? You know, what is going on with the way that country filters? Because it's not no, it's not yes. It's kind of, well, it depends. And that's been going on now for a couple of years. I haven't tried to reverse engineer it any further than that. There's certainly evidence. The first use and subsequent use certainly follow the global patterns, but the numbers are low. That's odd. Next. So in most locales, alt service kind of works and the network infrastructure doesn't block it most of the time. And what about HTTPS? HTTPS is faster. It's more reliable. I don't care about session persistence. It's just out of the gate, do quick. Or does the network not like delivering HTTPS answers? Don't forget that for endpoints in the network, oh, that's old hat, I'll give you answers. Quad A, yeah, right, no problem. HTTPS, that's obviously an attack. Obviously, because it's a new query type and it's kind of, oh, I don't know if it's genuine, or should I just pass it on and let the user figure it out? To what extent are we actually blocking HTTPS responses? Next. So I noticed that it contains the ability to do address records, IPv4 hint and IPv6 hint. What if I set up a resource that has no A and no quad A, it only has an HTTPS field? So that if you get the answer, you can get to the web object. If you're blocked in getting an HTTPS answer, you're out of luck. Next. So here's the table, and I group it up to the lot, and what I see is 26.1% of users actually do the query. In Chrome, it's not zero, again, it's an annoyingly low 1.7%. That's not Chrome, I think that's infrastructure. So a small number of folk use Chrome in an infrastructure that still asks for HTTPS. Safari uses 97% of folk ask for that record. Ask for that record, right? Now, only 75% use quick. And so I'm scratching my head, oh Safari people, people from Apple. Why, oh why, do approximately 1/4 of Safari users ask for the HTTPS record? I'm cool, I understand this crap, I will do quick. I've got back an answer, nah, I don't think I will. In the same network, on the desk beside them are folk running Chrome, quick is working perfectly well. It's not a network block. It's something about Safari that says, I'll toss a coin, it's your lucky day, I don't know. But around 1/4 of Safari users ask and then don't follow through. Next. Why is Safari not doing it? I said that, next. So Chrome uses alt service and doesn't use DNS HTTPS. Safari uses HTTPS Does it also use alt service? Next. Well, we can find that out by setting up something where you only get alt service to trigger it. So what we see, if there's only alt service, Safari, 2.9% of users do quick. Only. So clearly, they don't care about alt service. So the dominant browser uses alt service and not the DNS. The next one out of the block, Safari, uses HTTPS but not alt service. Why? Ask them. I have no idea. Next. Next. Now, what does that mean for you, the content publisher? You've got to do both. You've got to do both. Is this a victory for standards, or rather critical commentary on what a shit job we're doing, where we cannot agree on one mechanism? For those of you who are old enough, you might remember the OSI protocol suite, where to accommodate differing views from Europe and America, they decided to bless in their standard protocol specifications both connection-oriented and connectionless transports, and proclaimed it a victory for standards. The real issue was, if you had connection-oriented and I had connectionless, we could never talk. Over in the IETF, we were throwing rocks at them and laughing uproariously, saying, that's not a standard, that's shit. And you look at this and you go, have we just repeated that precise same issue, that we cannot agree on one mechanism to do something? If we can't agree on that, why do we bother being the IETF at all? If standards are merely random specifications thrown out, and some people may or may not follow them, that effectively contradict each other, then this is a joke. So why doesn't Chrome use the HTTPS query? I'm not Google, I don't know, but I have a guess. I suspect that there is so much Chrome out there that, caching notwithstanding, it will have a non-zero impact on the query load in the DNS. Because if every single connection is now A, possibly quad A, and HTTPS, in theory, you've added 50% into the DNS query load in the worst possible case. Maybe that's their reticence. Maybe there are other reasons. Safari, why doesn't it use alt service? It's there for free. Look at it, for Christ's sake. You've got it. No, no, no. I refuse to look at that. Why? Well, I'm just Apple. Why do 1/4 of Safari users do the quick query and then just ignore it, even though the network is perfectly capable of doing it? And even when there's no DNS HTTPS trigger, why do 2% of Safari users go, damn the torpedoes, even though you haven't told me you can, I'm just going to launch a query to HTTPS, to UDP port 443, just to see if you can answer, because I don't care about quick, I'm just going to probe and wait. Next. So there are obviously people in Google, people in Apple who can answer these questions. I think it's a disservice, though, that we get these contradictory mechanisms across the mainstream industry, and all it does is pile in complexity and load into the service content business and the provisioning business, just to satisfy the secret whims of the vendors of user product, where they simply cannot agree on standard mechanisms. And that, to me, is the biggest and saddest failing of this entire story. So I've left you with no doubt about what my opinions are. If there are any questions, I'll happily take them. Thank you. None?
Hi, Rich Sauls, Akamai. So the difference between the two specs, whatever the numbers were, is about 8 years. And so, gee, I guess to be confrontational in the way you do it, maybe you're just too old to appreciate the speed of change, right? I mean, maybe, it's not like, I mean, yes, we've been waiting for decades for IPv4, IPv6, but, the web is driven a lot, the internet's driven a lot by the web, and 8 years is a serious lifetime.
Quick has a certain momentum all of its own.
Yes.
But the barriers for content publishers to take advantage of it are there with the fact you've now got to go through both mechanisms. Everyone's got to adjust to two systems, both provisioning inside the DNS, which we all understand getting new resource records into that particular channel is challenging, and getting control of the HTTPS service directives. Yes, that's a challenge. But if we're going to think that what we have is all we have and nothing is malleable, why are you here?
Well, no.
Go home.
No.
You know?
So we're at my employer, we completely agree with the problem. But I just think it's, 8 years is not it's a big time, but it's not a insurmountable time. And in a year or two, it'll all be fine and we'll all use Service B. And I can point you to someone at Google who can give you a non-technical reason why they do what they do.
I don't think it's a sin to be impatient.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Bob Hinden. To your other comment, maybe I'm getting jaded, but having just two different ways doesn't seem so terrible to me compared to other areas. So maybe we should be happy.
But why don't they do both in both browsers? It certainly seems to me, although you might say, wow, the DNS load if Chrome went to HTTPS would be significant. And you kind of go, okay, I can appreciate your conservatism. But Safari peaking on the alt service directive seems to me to be a free win. And it's kind of, why aren't you doing this? Yeah. Eric.
Was there someone on the online queue in front of me?
Yes.
Yeah, and the screen says it's me, John Scudder. Hi. So I'm just kind of a dilettante in this space, but you mentioned that Safari sometimes goes and fetches the correct record that it could do a quick connection, but then for some reason it doesn't. As I understand it, at least some of these browsers do this thing they call racing, where they fire off both kinds of connections and then they arbitrarily decide one is faster than the other and just go with that one. Have you looked into whether that's what's going on?
I have looked into aborted TCP and quick connections. It's down in the tiny fractions of a percent. So I don't see probe A, probe B at once. There's not enough evidence to say that's the 24% the probe failed. And I also see that the networks where Safari doesn't use quick have Chrome browsers that are happily pulling quick. So at this point, I'm kind of going, I have no idea what's happening.
Eric Nigren, Akamai. I think following up on what Rich said, to give Chrome a little bit of buffer, the RFC for Service B wasn't published until November 2023, so that's only a year and a half ago, and kind of in the time scale that these sorts of things take to get developed and deployed, I'm hopeful that at some point that it may just be where it is on the roadmap. At least some of the browsers were also talking about only issuing HTTPS queries initially when they were talking via DOE. So that might be a factor for some things. If for seeing small numbers is if they're talking to their recursive resolver over DOE, they'll issue the HTTPS queries. You'd see a tiny fraction, and then the rest that were not using that might be the ones that aren't using it yet.
It'd be nice if someone from Chrome could add some light to this, but maybe they will in the fullness of time. No other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. So next presentation is, Jeff about BGP. Yeah. Okay. Slide. What is this? I'm trying to find out where do I need to click so you can use it. I can try using it. Okay. So let's try that. We have time to play with it. Oh, good. So now, okay, now I need to. Come on. What? Hold on. Sorry. Lack of coffee. I need to give you control, right? Yes. Yes. What? Hold on. Sorry. Stop. Yes, I have to do. Okay. You have to give it a click pad. Yeah. Now. You have the slide control.
as we work through our brand
Hold
new
on,
tools.
technology. When it works, it's great. But before you can make it work, it requires some effort.
So
It's
waiting
like
for,
IPv6, Jeff.
we're back in the typing here.
So, where do... I think you have control now. Oh.
Yeah, there we go. Lovely technology. Thank you, Midako. So before I get into my slides for this deck, I'm going to mention, since Quick is popular at IETF at the moment, there is actually work starting to happen in routing, where routing protocols are starting to evaluate using Quick for routing purposes. There'll be a small presentation that I give with a couple of people during the routing area open meeting about TLS considerations, since Quick is just really a fancy TLS stack. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to actually talk about BGP, and this is a talk aimed at the operator set. This is a follow-up, or actually closer to a preview of things that we're going to be talking about at Friday at IDR. And the topic is about BGP path attribute no filtering. So BGP's been around for a good long time, and path attributes as a way of passing around part of the state in the protocol has been there since BGP version 2. And basically, everybody knows a BGP route is, here's a destination, and here's this tuple of, path attributes to go with it, and some of them are incredibly well known. One of the properties for a given path attribute is this transitive thing. If it's non-transitive, that doesn't mean it doesn't go anywhere. It just means that the device, if it's ignorant about what the path attribute is, it's going to throw it away. So this is actually a incremental deployment mechanism. Transitive says, if I don't know what this thing is, carry it along to the next guy who does. And what this has meant for the entire life of BGP is that unrecognized, transitive path attributes are how BGP incrementally deploys new things. This sort of brings up the question about, in the protocol, well, if that's true, what does this, well-known mean? It's like we have things that are built into the core protocol that everybody learns BGP 101. Here's the AS path, here's your local path, here's your meds, next hops. And if you actually care about aggregation, which most people don't these days, much to Jeff's disheartened life over many years of report, you also have these aggregator attributes. And there's a giant registry of these things, many of which have been specified and been left at the grave. But this also means that we have a lot of things that have survived and have become popular. So route reflection, communities, the multi-protocol features, 4-byte AS paths, all of these things came into being because they were brand new path attributes, and they're all optional. The problem we have with path attributes is when we define new things, scoping for them wasn't really a consideration for the protocol at the time. We're making this stuff as we go along, but now we're 30 years into it, and these things have consequences. So easy examples of things that aren't in the original internet set that have become important are all these VPN features. We have an entire working group dedicated towards doing BGP-related VPN features. We also have popular infrastructure that uses BGP for dissemination because carrying the state alongside routing is appropriate. And as much as people like to use the BGP as a dump truck analogy, carrying around all this protocol trash, BGP-LS is very popular for carrying around segment routing state as an example. A significant portion of the Spring work that is not in the IGP does require BGP plumbing. These things, when you add them to the protocol, have consequences. The biggest one is that the whole point is you're changing how forwarding works, and these things change how route selection for BGP networks behave. The headache we have is that, especially in this crowd here, which is a little bit more internet operator focused, these features are not necessarily internet facing, but we do occasionally add new things that are important for internet, like large BGP communities. The headache is, when we're designing these features, how do we actually make use of incremental deployment? Well, the usual headache that we have is how do we actually throw these into a network? How do we make it pass through the route reflectors? And as a side effect, we make these things transitive. And the problem we have with transitive attributes is that they tend to leak out. If you define a new feature and you don't have something that's able to clean it up at the edges, which it usually can't because it doesn't know what the thing is, the attribute can escape. And I have a draft on that that's linked in here. The problem with attribute escape is that, this is sometimes, this may be a forwarding issue. You accept something that somebody else's, forwarding hint, maybe the tunnel encapsulation stuff. Maybe that causes misforwarding in your network. Maybe it causes hijacked traffic, so that becomes a security problem. And sometimes these things just significantly malfunction. Stuff leaking out for VPN features and the outages associated with them across the planet were strong motivations for us to update the BGP error handling facilities. RFC 7606 is where we did most of this work. And this was mostly to say, don't bounce the peering sessions when things go wrong. The problem is when you actually do get bad stuff, what do you do about it? We don't have general operational procedures that BGP as a protocol stack is recommending universally. And we have a number of different vendor knobs that are sometimes used to deal with this stuff. What do we actually want to have in terms of a filter feature? Well, being able to stop the routes that have an attribute, to simply not accept them, not propagate them, that's an option. The trouble is you're completing that as an attack if you just happen to be sloppy about cleanup somewhere in your network. Maybe it's better to actually just simply strip those things and throw them away. Maybe the option is I accept these things locally, but I actually ignore them because I think something in my network might actually want to make use of this. The problem is none of these behaviors are standardized. They are deployed. And the biggest headache is filtering new path attributes breaks incremental deployment for every new thing in BGP. And if you are an ISP, like a lot of people are in this room, or somebody that cares about internet operations, that filtering, you're making a choice for how you deploy features or how your customers deploy features downstream. If you throw it away, your customers can't use it. So there's this tension on brand new features that we have that we're trying to work through. So if you're considering path attribute filtering, as I mentioned, you're making those choices for your customers. But this is just like every other security story. If you're running firewalls, you understand this very well. What do I permit to go through? What's my security stance? Do I filter things by default because it makes things safer for my customers? Do I leave them open because I trust my customers to make the right choices? The headache we have is that if you're a service provider, your customers don't have an easy way to shop for this right now. A given provider seldom tells you exactly what they're doing. Sometimes it's hard enough to get them to tell you what they're doing with your BGP communities, this thing that's been around for years. Are they throwing it away? Are they passing it along? This is already a hard story. Filtering, if you're a Leaf AS, this is very easy. You can just throw things away. So this is really a question about the transit providers. So what could we do about this inside the protocol? So there's been work over the last several years talking about how do we do scoping, and sometimes we've had some good ideas. Sometimes we've had ideas that maybe will require some other work. We actually had a proposal for here's a standardized header for putting scoping into the path attributes. IDR seemed to think it was a good idea, and then it got thrown to the trash. Nobody was actually using it. That's something we're probably going to see only if we ever invent a BGP version 5. What we've been trying to do is bring general awareness about what scoping means to new features, and when we're actually designing new features, incorporate something into the PDU formats so that the escape is at least a managed thing. And the problem is with just simply bringing awareness means that you have to design for this up front. We're not doing a very good job of that. Option here to start considering is that filtering is a deployed practice. Operators are doing it today. So the problem is it's a silent feature. How do we maybe give a little bit of visibility? How do we standardize how some of these things work in a way that not only lets the operators solve and solve problems, protect their networks, but also give us a set of tools that can make this easier. So on Friday, there's going to be a proposal in the protocol. It's a very straightforward thing, and the problem with very straightforward things, there is opinions about how it works. John and I are in the process of maybe updating things Different than the slide we have here. This one's a set of permit bits. We're going to say what we actually allow to go through. Now, the discussion John and I are having right now is maybe we just simply move this to here's the stuff we're throwing away. Pay no attention to the ones and zeros. It's not terribly interesting once we actually know what we want to do with these things. This is just a filter that says what can go through, what doesn't go through. The better question for this crowd is, what do we actually do? You're building networks. What's the actual default policy you want to have, for these things? If it's unknown, today we let it go through. Do we continue to let that happen? When we introduce some brand new thing, say in Best that has the chance to knock over 2 or 3 ISPs from bugs, is that something we want to be filtered by default and show up in some registry somewhere that the tools can actually build that filter list by default? If we're going to do these things, is the behavior that should actually throw the routes away? Should it block the routes? Should it actually just discard the attribute because that's what should have happened if this was working properly? These are all choices. People in the room that are actually operating BGP networks have to decide what we want to do here, and we have to help build the tools that accomplish this stuff. So this is a request. Let's start talking. Filtering is happening. Having visibility, just to simply say, here's what the routers are doing, and you can see what your neighbor, at least on a per network, per hop basis, might actually be doing with the stuff you hand it, will save you some of your troubleshooting headaches. Publishing broader policy somewhere might be a good idea. Does this go into something like the IRR, RPKI, just simply a well-known page in or maybe something in DNS? Now that's a discussion. Things like community registries are an example. We don't really have a standard, but we have an awful lot of practices that people still do anyway. And what sort of extra visibility features should we be providing for these things? When you turn this on, how do you, as an impacted customer through a transit network, figure out this is happening? And again, what's the default policies? Changing the default from our current carry everything is going to be a big shift. It is going to break brand new features. And as much as people say, please keep all this VPN crap out of my network, they get very upset if they decide, well, this new thing that's maybe just as popular as large communities can't happen. That's the talk. Again, the whole point is to start the dialogue about what we're actually able to do in terms of the protocol features and what we actually do as operators. Comments are greatly appreciated. And we have nothing. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, and the last presenter for today is Rudiger. Yeah, okay, share slides. Hold on. Okay, share slides. Key, confirm the choice. You want to request control or you're okay talking to me? Still can.
Good morning. It's my pleasure to be here today at IETF 123 in Madrid.
Can you go close to the mic a bit? Good. Yeah.
Better now?
Yeah.
Okay, feels very close. But anyway, so good morning. It's my pleasure to be here at IETF 123 in Madrid. My name is Rüdiger Martin, and I'm with the European Commission, the Internet Governance team within DG Directorate General Connect. So today I would like to give you a short overview of the concept and scope of the upcoming multi-stakeholder forum on Internet standards deployment. It's currently in preparation, and it builds on cybersecurity requirements in NIS 2. They are set out in NIS 2, the NIS 2 directive, and its implementing act. Your feedback is, of course, most welcome. We are approaching finalization, but not in a vacuum. Next slide, please. So first, let me briefly walk you through the regulatory background. Next slide, please. So The NIS2 Network and Information Security 2 Directive is the EU's principal legislative framework for enhancing cybersecurity and resilience across the Union. Its scope covers essential and important entities across sectors providing services in the internal market, and it has been complemented by a legally binding implementing act that was adopted on the 17th of October 2024, and it introduces a specific requirements for a list of operators or entities which provide digital cross-border services. One part, and that is why I'm here today, of this act relates to the deployment of recognized internet standards and best practices with well-accepted benefits but lagging behind in deployment rates. Next slide, please. So if you look at the requirements, the Implementing Act contains requirements for 4 key categories of standards and best practices critical to the internet's resilience and cybersecurity. If you read through these requirements, then this relates to IPv6, email security, DNS security, best practices actually for DNS security, and best practices for routing security and hygiene. The aim is not to prescribe technologies from the top down, but to define a set of high-level outcomes that entities must achieve and which in turn can be fulfilled through, for instance, the adoption of appropriate technical standards and best practices. In that sense, the obligations under the Implementing Act focus on outcomes that can be achieved through more deployment. Next slide, please. So in its recital 8, so this is part of the text, the Implementing Act explicitly refers to the need for multi-stakeholder cooperation to define how best to achieve all of that, how to best meet the requirements. And that's what this forum is all about. So this by no means is about developing new standards. This is IETF territory firmly, and by no means it's about developing new best practices, but it's about identifying which ones are best suited for deployment and how to best go about it and in what timelines. But more on that in a moment. Next slide, please. Regarding objectives, tasks, and outputs. So the forum itself will be implemented by the Commission's Joint Research Center, which brings a strong operational and technical experience. The forum, if I may say so, is a coordination mechanism. It's a body to facilitate common action convened by the Commission and to support the ecosystem in converging on implementation pathways. So in that sense, it brings the multi-stakeholder model to the next level, not only at the design stage, where of course consultations with the multi-stakeholder community are a must and are standard since quite a while, but also during its implementation. So the forum's role is to provide practical guidance to help entities fulfill their obligations under NIS2 based on technical consensus, shared experience, and evidence from deployment practice. Next slide, please. So what are the central deliverables of the forum? The central deliverables of the forum will be a set of deployment guidelines for each of the 4 deliverables categories. It will identify best available standards and best practices, proven deployment techniques, realistic and optimal timelines. And in addition, the forum also aims to foster cooperation and collaboration, mutual support and convergence, and in line with broader policies, the acceleration of deployment within these 4 categories beyond the direct addresses of the NIS2 Implementing Act by its virtue of its broader value. So it goes beyond that. In that sense, membership will also not be limited to entities falling under this direct requirement. Next slide, please. So in practical terms, the forum will identify best available standards and best practices in each of the areas, examine barriers to deployment and how to overcome them. It will document and consolidate operational experience and propose realistic deployment timelines that balance urgency and feasibility. The emphasis is throughout on deployment and implementation at scale. So next slide, please. The forum will include stakeholders from across the internet ecosystem. Next slide, please. And this slide gives you a sense of the diversity we are aiming for. It's by no means complete, since we want to ensure that all relevant perspectives are represented. Participation is intended to be open to those with relevant deployment experience and expertise. We are especially keen to ensure that insights from real-world deployment are front and center. So next slide, please. This shows you how the forum should be organized. It would be organized around 4 work streams, each corresponding to one of the areas. Each forum will have its own technical editorial group, which actually does the drafting and brings the drafting forward based on the input received. And then there's a chair, of course, for every work stream, and there are several coordination mechanisms foreseen, like the coordination group, which makes sure that things are also coordinated over different work streams, and then some other things which I'm not going into now in detail. Next slide, please. So that actually ends my presentation on this forum. In summary, it's designed to take stock and facilitate practical deployment guidelines of critical internet standards, aligned with legislative requirements, but guided by technical multi-stakeholder expertise. Technical communities, the IETF community, are crucial to this forum because that's where the expertise sits, also where operational deployment knowledge is available. And in that sense, thanks a lot for listening to this presentation. And of course, we are looking forward to your feedback either now or on Wednesday, where we do organize a side meeting on that topic.
Hello to the ground.
Testing. That's
Yay.
much better. Yeah, there we go. I am audible. Hello. Thank you very much for your presentation. Tom Hill from British Telecom, obviously not a European Union member country any longer, which is extremely sad, I must say. I have 2 questions in particular. One, to what end, the meeting calendar is very busy. To what end do we need another European-focused standards body? And were there not others that could be added to or augmented in some way? And the second one was, are you limiting participation to European Union countries? Or do you feel that it would be useful to have some of your neighbors, nice neighbors, involved as well?
Well, since you asked so nicely to start backwards, of course, by definition, a primary focus are EU stakeholders, or we think that they are most attracted, but it will not be limited only to EU stakeholders. So just to answer this. And then to answer your first question, it's not a standardization body, it's really a deployment body. And in that sense, we do believe that there's a need for it because information is available here and there and a bit everywhere, but it's really to put it together, to collect the state of the art, to put it into guidelines, and to enable stakeholders to move forward. And that really comprises, as I said, the what, the how, and the by when. So we really do think that's not something which is done for the time being anywhere else.
I could disagree, but I think there's a very long queue, so I'm going to cede my time. Thank you very much.
I think this is Carolina, but I think there's another person in the queue. Or am I next?
No, you're next.
I'm
You're
next.
next.
Hi there. Thank you for the presentation. I guess I'm a bit confused as to what the timeline is for this and whether you're seeing this forum as a one-off um, to come up with some sort of guidelines of what standards should be adopted, and that's it, or whether this is a forum that will meet regularly. If you could provide a bit of sort of context as to, yeah, again, sort of the timeline and whether, I guess the question is whether this is a one-off or a continued effort.
Of course. We do have all that also on our slides for Wednesday. I cut it out for here because I didn't want to dive too much into all of that. But very happily, I'm briefly expanding on this. So the idea is to start in Q4 of this year and roughly to have a timeline of 2 years to be done with that. We are very well wary that, of course, people are busy, are attending meetings, so we want to reduce also or to take account of that when it comes to the traveling effort in a good combination between the possibility of meeting on site, which triggers completely different discussions also, of course, and participating online. So to really balance all of that. And in that sense, to come back to the beginning of your question, it's now focused on this particular requirements, but who knows what grows out of that.
Jim Reid, freelance consultant from Scotland. Thanks again for this presentation, Rudiger. I think it's very helpful. Tom kind of asked one of the questions I wanted to ask, and you answered already about participation and if it's restricted just to EU citizens. But I would like to look at another thing about where do you see, how do you position this potential forum in relation to the work that's been done about development of best practices and other operational procedures that are being done in other fora? And how will this forum that you're proposing differentiate itself from the work that's being done in those other places? I think this is a key thing to try and get people involved in what you're proposing, because if they see this work being done, say for example in DNSSEC deployment and uptake, what's the incentive to involve themselves in your effort as opposed to these other ones that have been going for a while? And the same thing applies in other areas that you were talking about. But I was just giving the DNSSEC one as an example of why should we sign up for yours as opposed of something that's already in place.
Well, first of all, basically there is a regulatory framework, and this forum feeds into this regulatory framework and develops these guidelines to basically make clear how this regulatory framework is fulfilled. So in that sense, it draws from other existing work, and yes, of course, already by pointing to the stakeholder communities, there is a mapping, so what could come from where.
Yeah, but if I could just turn this round a little bit, Rudiger, if you could put yourself in my shoes as opposed to yours. I take part in some of these initiatives to do, for example, DNSSEC. So when I have to go to these meetings, I have to pay for them out of my own pocket. So when I make a decision to participate in something, it's because I see an immediate value and there's going to be a benefit to me, either in terms of improving my knowledge and expertise or in actual getting a business by taking part in these initiatives. So the question for me is a pure business calculation: is why should I participate in this forum? What's going to be in it for me as a freelance contractor? And the same thing would apply for a lot of potential businesses. I think they would take a business decision about this. What's in it for me as a business to take part in this forum?
Well, I think there are several reasons why one would like to participate in that. It's the first initiative ever in the EU to be linked to a regulatory framework, and it provides a collection of the state of the art, which of course is the baseline for this regulatory framework. And beyond that, it's potentially so much more impactful of what is being put together there because of this background.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, this is Luis Contreras from Telefónica. A couple of questions here. One is you referred at the beginning about resiliency, but I'm not sure if it's only limited to cybersecurity or also the idea would be also to address resiliency in terms of the structural design of the network or basically levels of service and so on and so forth. This is one first question. And the second question is because you are framing this in the regulatory scope, should we expect somehow as an outcome of this effort to some mandatory guidelines or would be recommendations? What is the expected here in this respect?
To start with the beginning of your question, yes, the deployment of some of these internet standards best practices does have effects which go beyond cybersecurity. But of course, the measure as such is focused on cybersecurity and resilience. And in terms of the outcome, as I said, it's really this collection of the what, how, by when, and these guidelines form or summarize the state of the art. So the requirements in the NIS2 are mandatory, and these guidelines describe the baseline, the state of the art against which it then can be assessed. Of course, if you are, for instance, an authority who has to assess this, what could be done, what should have been done.
Okay, thank you.
Eric Vink. Good morning, Rüdiger.
Good morning.
Simply to thank you for coming here and to the European Commission to come here and reaching out to the IETF community. Thank you.
Leslie Daigle, I'll add the thank you for coming here and sharing this. I have two observations to share. One, this, as described, is really not so much focused about making the internet a better place. It really is coming from the regulator, an effort for defining measurement and compliance, which is a different kind of thing entirely. As I said, it's an observation. The other thing I wanted to say is, as you seek to find the best practices that your stakeholders determine to be the best for their interests, even though you are not intending to set up a standards body or compete with standards bodies, you will be making choices about which parameters to implement, which parameters to prioritize, and effectively making design choices, or at least practical choices for deployment in the internet that reach far beyond the borders of your region. We've seen this particularly in the case of manners and in the case of routing security. It's the sort of thing where you can't just define it for your stakeholders because the internet is global. The internet has to interoperate globally. So in terms of participation, you really can't say it's just our stakeholders in the EU. For the things you're describing, the stakeholders are global. Thank you.
Well, indeed. So we were not very limitative in that. And just to be clear and to go a bit backwards on this. So what is behind all of that? There is the background which shows in a scientific analysis that the deployment of standards is really lacking behind of what we are referring to, which has significant implications when it comes to cybersecurity and to others. And so there are shortcomings in deployment where we then would like to contribute also by these guidelines. And yes, the technical multi-stakeholder community probably will have to make choices, but these are choices which show how is it possible to go forward with the implementation to achieve this. It doesn't say it's the only way. So in that sense, if you look at the basic requirements, they are very open on the what, how, and by when. And yes, regarding the deployment, we have been following for years now with the help of our scientific in-house joint research center, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, where our colleagues, our science colleagues, have been looking at deployment rates which are globally available publicly. They have been combining them with own measurements and have been depicting them on a public website. And that's where this is coming from.
Right, and sorry, I should clarify. In my day job, I'm the CTO of the Global Cyber Alliance, which is currently the secretariat for the manners activity. So I have some awareness of alternative approaches to ensuring and fostering the successful deployment globally of standards. Thank you.
Check. Microphone went. Maybe I got to get closer. I don't know what's going on here. Richard Wilhelm, Public Interest Registry. Tilted Jim says, always listen to Jim Reed, unless it's not a good idea to listen to Jim Reed. IETF wisdom on a Sunday. Thank you for confirming the ability to participate even if you're not an EU member. Everybody in this room, if they're not aware of the extraterritoriality of NIS2 regulation, should read NIS2 and understand the extraterritoriality of the NIS2 regulation, because it affects you even if you're not within the NIS borders, if not a member of the EU. The somewhere between a question and a comment, I was looking at slide 10, which includes the stakeholder landscape, which is quite broad, and that's good. And then also the outputs, which are on slide 8, which talk about guidelines for various different things: network, emails, DNS security, internet routing, and hygiene. And I'm wondering how you're going to balance governing and decision making when there's a bigger group there and they're talking about things that, and establishing consensus when there's things that people might not necessarily have stake in, and they're going, how are you going to be getting consensus? Or is the EU just going to come in and say, this is the decision? Because if this is going to be a multi-stakeholder forum, how is the governance going to work? Because if it's hosted and run by the EU, that where government is there, that's not really multi-stakeholderism. It's a forum convened by the EU, by government. So it seems kind of contradictory to me. And this is kind of echoing a little bit of what Leslie's saying, maybe with a little bit different flavor. Thank you.
You're raising very relevant points here, of course. And this is all currently under development, and there will be something which is called a terms of references for the group. And there will be a call for participation where all of that is further specified. But yes, so this is work in progress. And of course, we are aiming at consensus. And yeah.
See you on Tuesday. Thank you.
So I'm not Rüdiger Volk, I'm Peter Koch, and Rüdiger sold his slot to myself, I guess. So Peter Koch-Dienig. Rüdiger, thank you very much for presenting this in this kind of audience, and also for conducting the session on, I believe, Wednesday. Things that have been mentioned that I think are important and maybe can be discussed in more detail on Wednesday and further on is these rules of engagement for the groups. Not only because what others have said, this is reaching far beyond the European Union, but also within. My experience with best practices is that defining those has more and more developed into an exercise of documenting trade-offs. So the idea that there's a recipe that will work for everybody and a set of parameters that everybody can just join is maybe a bit over-optimistic, and that's the crux of this kind of endeavor. But happy to engage in the discussion. Another one is, you said that the scientific group is doing these measurements. I think the community has done lots of these measurements as well, and they should be input to discussions as well. But also, it is important to understand not only the numbers, but more importantly, the deployment obstacles, where they are and how they can be mitigated. And that mitigation, we have at least one very good example where that worked. And I'll point everybody to World IPv6 Day, which was not done by regulation, but was done by cooperation of involved parties to mitigate the risk in that case of falling victim to the so-called first mover disadvantage. And these are lots of detailed considerations that need to go in there. And I just hope that given the ambitious timeline, there is enough time and space on the agenda to understand these kind of triggers and effects that do or do not encourage deployment of things that are, and that makes it so difficult, are at the core of the internet, where nobody has the power, I'm sorry, to just set a flag date and everybody enables it and it works. Thank you so much.
Yes, indeed. So the number collection I mentioned before did take account of all the publicly available numbers. And in that sense, the Joint Research Center, our colleague from the Joint Research Center, also took into account all these deployment obstacles. So they were looking at what are obstacles, and the guidelines will hopefully account for the complexities. That's one of the purposes.
Hi, sorry. Hi, Andrew Campling, 419 Consulting. I guess in the unlikely event there are people that aren't following sort of things like NIST too closely, I suppose we ought to just remind ourselves that it came into force in October last year. I know some countries, some member states have been a bit slow in actually transposing it into national law, and I know the Commission is taking action to encourage them to speed up. But the fact remains, in theory at least, it is in force and people have to implement it. So I guess, Rudiger, with or without these guidelines, people will have to make decisions about implementation. So it's probably better to offer guidelines that people could choose to follow than not. That seems to be helpful. So in my view, I think the Commission should be sort of congratulated for putting some effort into trying to offer up guidelines for those people that have got to implement regardless. But thank you.
Indeed.
Okay, Rüdiger Volk. Kind of the, well, okay, previous but one contribution discussion. There was the mentioning of, well, okay, yeah, Peter Koch mentioned that this area needs to take into account trade-offs, and actually I would say, for at least say the routing security thing, a vision of the trajectory forward to moving to more security, to with technologies that are still under discussion and certainly can only be envisioned as being deployed in 5 or 10 years, kind of, to me, it seems very important that the operational considerations for these trade-offs need to be included, and kind of your research center may have drawn in all kinds of measurements. Actually, the considerations, or the actual considerations for operational trade-offs are things that usually are not published and to be read anywhere. And kind of my particular interest would be to make sure that that kind of stuff actually is goes into the process. Anyway, I'm quite happy to see that the Commission is actually asking and reaching out to get into dialogue with stakeholders, so that, well, okay, whatever you or we produce in the end actually is addressing both the requirements that you as a regulator have. You have questions of, well, okay, what kind of answers should be there in the documents that you will be saying are to be considered as important. Sorry, I lost my thread.
Well, I think you also made relevant remarks there, and I just would like to point out, because you were also speaking of very forward-looking perspective, which is important. At the same time, many of the things we are talking about or we are aiming at are available and are out there and can be deployed, but there are obstacles currently still.
Thank you very much, Rüdiger. Thanks, everyone. So see you in, what is going to be? Montreal. And please think about presentations. I'm quite sure Warren would love to see submissions and agenda items. So thanks again. Okay. Done. Huh. What? I'm still. I need to exit it.
I will set it up on the web page this afternoon. I don't feel under any great hurry.
No, I now need to. So I close the browser and it's still presenting.
Black magic, voodoo. Eric. I want to see Eric.
Okay.
How can we change your policy? The point is, let's talk about what the problem is, and can we frame it in a way that so what I heard is similar to the problem that